I never expected my own family to betray me at Sunday dinner. We were passing the mashed potatoes when Derek cleared his throat and announced, "Ross, starting next month, your rent is $8,000. My fork froze midair. "What? That's 10 times what I pay now." My brother smirked, swirling his wine. "The market is hot. Don't like it? Move out." I looked to my parents for support, but Mom and Dad actually laughed. Dad patted Derek on the shoulder. "Smart business move, son." Their validation of his cruelty crushed me more than the impossible rent hike. My promotion celebration turned into my public humiliation. The basement apartment in my grandparents' house had been my sanctuary for the past 3 years. After my divorce from Allison, I was emotionally and financially broken. Losing half of everything we owned, plus taking on our joint credit card debt, had left me sleeping on my buddy Tom's couch until Derek offered me the basement apartment. Our grandparents had passed away 4 years ago, leaving the house to my brother as the eldest grandchild. $800 a month until you get back on your feet," Derek had said back then, seeming genuinely concerned. Grandma and Grandpa would have wanted to help. Those words kept replaying in my head as I sat at the dinner table, my celebratory pot roast turning to ash in my mouth. $8,000. It was beyond absurd. The entire 3-bedroom house might rent for $4,000 in our suburban Ohio neighborhood. Our family dinners were a monthly tradition, rotating between our parents' house, Derek's place, and our Aunt Linda's home. This month should have been special. After 3 years of grinding at my marketing job, taking on extra projects and working weekends, I had finally been promoted to senior account manager. A 20% raise in my own office, a small victory on my long road to rebuilding my life at 32 years old. "I put $12,000 of my savings into renovating that basement," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "New drywall, flooring, bathroom fixtures. I did most of the work myself on weekends." Derek shrugged, cutting into his pot roast. "Home improvements increase the property value. That belongs to the homeowner. Basic real estate knowledge, bro." Our mother Susan nodded as if this made perfect sense, while our father Gary refilled Derek's wine glass. Our cousin Jack looked uncomfortable, studying his plate with unusual interest. "Grandma and Grandpa always said that house was meant to support both of us," I pressed on, feeling a tightness in my chest. "They specifically mentioned the basement apartment being perfect for family." "Well, they left it to me," Derek said flatly. "And $800 is highway robbery in today's market. I was doing you a favor, but I need to think about my future too." My apartment was nothing fancy. 600 square feet with low ceilings, a small kitchenette, 1 bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower stall. Before I renovated it, the space had been unfinished storage with concrete floors and exposed insulation. Now it was livable, even cozy, but certainly not worth anything close to $8,000 monthly. The salary from my new position would be about $60,000 a year. After taxes, that would barely cover the new rent, leaving nothing for food, car payments, insurance, or continuing to pay down my lingering divorce debt. I was formulating another argument when Jack pulled me aside during dessert. He led me to the back porch, checking to make sure we were alone. "Look, I shouldn't say anything," he whispered, "but you should know what's really going on. Amanda filed for divorce last month. Derek's trying to hide assets and raise quick cash for the settlement." The news hit me like a bucket of ice water. Derek and Amanda had been married for 8 years. They had always seemed solid, the perfect couple at every family gathering. But now it made sense why Amanda wasn't at dinner tonight, why Derek had been drinking more heavily than usual, and why he suddenly needed to extract an impossible amount of money from me. "Why didn't he just tell me?" I asked, more to myself than to Jack. "You know Derek," Jack sighed. "He never admits weakness. Easier to be the villain than the victim." I returned to the table with this new understanding, but it didn't make the situation any less dire. Regardless of Derek's reasons, I had 30 days to either come up with an impossible sum or find a new place to live. "Congratulations on the promotion, Ross," my Aunt Linda said brightly. trying to salvage the dinner conversation. "Tell us more about what you'll be doing." I tried to focus, to share the details of my new responsibilities managing key client accounts, but Derek's announcement had poisoned the well. Each time I spoke, I felt my parents' dismissive glances, as if my achievements paled beside Derek's business acumen. "It's not just about the money," I finally said, unable to pretend any longer. Derek and I had a verbal agreement. I invested in the property with the understanding that I would be living there long-term at a reasonable rate. Derek scoffed. "Verbal agreements aren't legally binding." "That's not the point," I insisted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "This is about family, about keeping your word." My father set down his fork with a clank. "Now listen here, Ross. Your brother is doing what any smart property owner would do. The real estate market waits for no one. If you'd applied yourself more over the years instead of pursuing that art degree before switching to marketing, maybe you'd understand business better." The familiar criticism stung. I had spent 2 years in art school before realizing it wouldn't provide the stable future I wanted, then switched to marketing and communications. My father had never forgiven what he saw as wasted time and money. "Gary, that's enough," my mother said, but her tone conveyed agreement with the sentiment if not the delivery. "Ross, sweetheart, we're very proud of your promotion. But Derek does own the house, and he needs to make financial decisions that make sense for him." I looked around the table at my family. Aunt Linda was nervously rearranging her napkin. My cousins Jack and Melissa were avoiding eye contact. Only my Uncle Pete seemed troubled by what was happening. "Can I just point out that $8,000 is nowhere near market rate for a basement apartment," Uncle Pete said. "That's Manhattan penthouse pricing in suburban Ohio." "Pete, stay out of this," my mother warned. "No, he's right," I said, finding my voice again. "This isn't about market rates. It's about forcing me out, without having the decency to be direct about it." Derek's face flushed red. "You want direct? Fine. I've subsidized your recovery from that disaster of a marriage for 3 years. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. I have plans for that space that don't include my little brother living in my basement into his 40s. The words hit like physical blows. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "Ross, sit down," my mother pleaded. "We can discuss this like adults." "There's nothing to discuss," I said quietly. "Derek's made his decision, and you've made it clear whose side you're on." I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me at the doorway. "Running away from problems has always been your specialty, hasn't it, son?" I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. As I reached for my jacket in the hallway, Jack followed me out. "I need to tell you something else," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard Derek on the phone last week. He's planning to convert the basement into a vacation rental. He thinks he can get $200 a night from tourists visiting the lake during summer." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about Derek's divorce or raising quick cash. This was a calculated business move, one he'd likely been planning for months, while I continued to pour money and effort into improving what I thought would be my home for years to come. "Thanks for telling me," I said, feeling a strange calm replace the shock and anger. At least now I know where I stand. As I drove home that night, the basement apartment I'd lovingly renovated no longer felt like my sanctuary. It felt like the site of my most recent failure, another place where I hadn't been quite good enough to stay. But beneath the hurt and betrayal, something else was taking root: determination. I wasn't going to go quietly this time, not without a fight. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face client meetings while my personal life was imploding. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table with a legal pad, coffee, and my laptop, making lists and researching my options. First, I needed to understand my rights as a tenant. Even without a formal lease, I discovered that after living somewhere for over a year and establishing regular payment patterns, I had certain protections under state law. Derek couldn't just triple my rent overnight, let alone multiply it by 10. There were regulations about reasonable increases and notice periods. More importantly, I began to suspect that my basement apartment might not be a legal rental unit at all. The ceiling height was just under 7 feet in some areas. There was only one exit door, and the windows were too small to serve as emergency exits. If Derek had never registered it as a rental property, or obtained the proper permits for conversion from storage to living space, he might be in violation of housing codes. By noon, I had a plan. I started by photographing every inch of the apartment, documenting all the improvements I'd made. I gathered bank statements, showing my consistent rent payments and receipts for materials I'd purchased for renovations. I even found text messages from Derek, acknowledging and thanking me for the work I was doing on our family home. The next day, I took a long lunch break from work and visited the county records office. I requested copies of the property records, tax filings, and most importantly, our grandparents' will. The clerk, a friendly woman named Patty, with silver hair and kind eyes, helped me navigate the system. Family property disputes are always the hardest, she said sympathetically, as she printed the documents I'd requested. Been working here 30 years, and I've seen brothers and sisters stop speaking forever over less than this. The thought sent a chill through me. Despite everything, I didn't want to lose my relationship with Derek permanently. But I also couldn't allow myself to be treated this way. The will was enlightening. While it did leave the house to Derek, there was specific language about providing for both grandsons. The property was intended to benefit us both, even if the legal ownership went to my brother. It wasn't legally binding in terms of how Derek should use the property, but it clearly expressed our grandparents' intentions. More interestingly, the property tax records showed that Derek had never declared rental income from the property, nor had he registered with the county as a landlord. The house was still classified as a single-family dwelling, not a multi-unit building. Over the next few days, I continued my investigation while maintaining a facade of normalcy at work. I contacted a tenant rights organization and was referred to an affordable legal aid attorney named Nancy Foster. She agreed to meet with me for a reduced consultation fee. Nancy's office was small but professional, with certificates covering one wall and family photos on her desk. She listened carefully as I explained my situation, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Based on what you've told me, your brother is in a legally vulnerable position," she said when I finished. "Operating an unregistered rental unit, failing to declare rental income, and now attempting to impose an unconscionable rent increase all work in your favor. I don't want to get him in trouble with the tax authorities," I admitted. "He's still my brother." Nancy nodded. "That's understandable. But you need leverage to negotiate, and right now, these issues are your leverage. You don't have to use all of it, but you should know what cards you're holding." I left her office with a clearer understanding of my position and a list of next steps. That evening, I called our grandparents' longtime friend, Walter Johnson, who had been like an uncle to us growing up. After catching up briefly, I carefully broached the subject of the house. "Walter, did my grandparents ever discuss with you what they wanted to happen to their house after they were gone?" There was a pause on the line. "They sure did, Ross. They were quite clear that they wanted that house to support both you boys. Your grandmother specifically mentioned how perfect that basement apartment would be for you if you ever needed it. They knew Derek would get married first and need the main house for his family, but they always saw that place as belonging to both of you in different ways." My throat tightened with emotion. "Do you happen to have anything in writing about that? Any cards or letters where they might have mentioned it?" "Let me think," Walter said. "Your grandmother was quite the letter writer. I might have something in my files. I'll look and get back to you." 2 days later, Walter called back. He'd found a birthday card from my grandmother from 5 years ago before she passed. Inside, she'd written a long note mentioning her hopes for the house. "Gary and I are getting our affairs in order, and we're so pleased knowing the house will go to Derek. But we'll always have a place for Ross, too. That basement apartment will be perfect for him whenever he needs it, just as we've always discussed with the boys." It wasn't a legal document, but it was further evidence of their intentions. Walter agreed to provide a sworn statement about the many conversations he'd had with my grandparents about their wishes for the property. As my investigation continued, I uncovered one final, crucial piece of evidence. By requesting access to my grandparents' safe deposit box through the executor of their estate, a family friend who had never fully closed the estate administration, I discovered an unsealed letter addressed to our grandsons. Inside, my grandmother had written explicit instructions that while Derek would own the house, the basement was to be available to me at a family rate whenever I needed it throughout my life. She specified that this arrangement was not a legal requirement, but a moral one, based on their trust that their grandsons would honor their wishes and support each other. With the letter in hand, I finally felt ready to confront Derek. Not with anger or accusations, but with evidence of our grandparents' true wishes and the legal vulnerabilities in his position. I wasn't looking to punish my brother or extract revenge. I just wanted a fair resolution that respected our grandparents' intentions and my own investments in the property. What I didn't expect was to discover, through a chance meeting with Derek's soon-to-be ex-wife Amanda at a coffee shop, that there was even more to the story than I realized. "He's in trouble, Ross," she confided after we got past the initial awkwardness. "Gambling debts, tens of thousands. That's the real reason for our divorce. I found out he second mortgaged the house without telling me. He's been lying to everyone. Is that why he's trying to force me out of the basement?" I asked. Amanda nodded, looking tired beyond her years. "He told one of his gambling buddies he could stay there rent-free to work off some of the debt. He's desperate and making terrible decisions." This revelation changed everything. My brother wasn't just being greedy or callous. He was drowning and flailing wildly, hurting everyone around him in his desperation to stay afloat. It made me even more determined to find a solution that wouldn't just protect me, but might ultimately help Derek too. Armed with what I'd learned, I invited Derek to meet me for breakfast at a neutral location, a diner halfway between our workplaces. To my surprise, he agreed, though his text was curt. "Fine. Henry's Diner. 7:30 a.m. tomorrow." I arrived early and claimed a booth in the back, away from other customers. When Derek walked in, I was shocked by his appearance. My brother had always been the picture of professional success. Tailored suits, perfect haircut, confident stride. The man who slid into the booth across from me looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, his normally clean-shaven face stubbled, his shirt wrinkled. "Thanks for coming," I said, pushing a menu toward him. "Let's skip the small talk," he replied. "If this is about the rent increase, my decision is final." The waitress came by, and we both ordered coffee. Once she left, I took a deep breath and decided to be direct. "I know about the gambling debts, Derek, and about promising the basement to one of your poker buddies." His face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Amanda had no right to tell you that. She's worried about you. So am I." I kept my voice low and calm. "Look, I understand you're in a difficult situation, but making me homeless isn't the solution." Derek stared into his coffee cup. "You don't understand anything about my situation. Then help me understand. Maybe we can figure something out together. I could pay more rent, something reasonable that works for both of us." For a moment, I thought I was getting through to him. His shoulders slumped, and he looked up with what seemed like genuine remorse. "It's too late, Ross. I owe people you don't want to know. Dangerous people. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. I'm underwater on everything. Let me help," I pleaded. "We can talk to financial advisors, look into debt consolidation, maybe even bankruptcy if it's that bad." Derek's laugh was hollow. "You think bankruptcy will save me from the kind of people I owe? This isn't credit card debt. Then we need to go to the police. And tell them what? That I illegally gambled away everything I own? That I committed loan fraud? That'll solve all my problems." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "What about Mom and Dad? Have you told them?" Derek's expression hardened. "They don't need to know. And you're not going to tell them. They might be able to help, the way they helped you after your divorce? Telling you to man up and deal with it yourself?" He shook his head. "They've always seen me as the successful one. I'm not going to shatter that image." I realized then that beneath Derek's arrogance was a desperate need to maintain our parents' approval. even at the cost of his integrity. It was both sad and frustrating. "I'm willing to increase my rent to $1,500, I offered. "That's nearly double what I'm paying now, and it's the absolute most I can afford with my new salary." "Not enough," Derek said flatly. "Need at least $4,000 to make a dent." "That's impossible, and you know it. No one would pay that for a basement apartment in our area." "Then I guess you'll be moving." He stood up, throwing a $5 bill on the table for his untouched coffee. "You have 30 days. My next attempt at reconciliation involved our parents. I invited them to lunch the following Sunday, carefully not mentioning that Derek wouldn't be there. When they realized it was just the three of us, their disappointment was palpable. "Where's your brother?" my father asked immediately. "I wanted to talk to you both about what's happening with the house," I explained. "I thought it would be easier without Derek here." My mother frowned. "If this is about the rent situation, your father and I have already told you we support Derek's decision." "Do you even know what's really going on?" I asked. "Did you know he's planning to let one of his gambling buddies live in the basement?" My parents exchanged glances. "What gambling buddies?" my father asked cautiously. I took them through everything I'd learned. Derek's gambling addiction, his divorce, the second mortgage, his desperate financial situation. As I spoke, their expressions changed from skepticism to concern. "Why wouldn't he come to us?" my mother whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Because he's afraid of disappointing you," I said gently. "He's always been the successful one. It's a lot of pressure." My father, normally quick with judgments and solutions, sat in stunned silence. "What can we do?" my mother finally asked. "First, we need to convince Derek to get help for his gambling. Then we need to figure out the financial mess he's created. And in the meantime, I need to know that I'm not going to be thrown out of my home." My father nodded slowly. "We'll talk to him, make him see reason." But their intervention went no better than mine. Derek accused me of turning our parents against him and refused to admit the extent of his problems. Instead of bringing us together, it only deepened the divide. My final attempt at reconciliation came in the form of family counseling. I scheduled a session with a therapist who specialized in family conflicts and financial issues, and somehow convinced Derek to attend by telling him it was the only way I would consider any kind of rent increase. Dr. Levine's office was designed for comfort, with soft lighting and comfortable seating arranged in a circle. She began by establishing ground rules. No interrupting, no personal attacks. Each person would have time to share their perspective. I spoke first, focusing on my desire to find a solution that worked for everyone and honored our grandparents' wishes. I explicitly avoided mentioning Derek's gambling or the second mortgage, hoping he might bring it up himself. When it was Derek's turn, he was surprisingly vulnerable for the first few minutes, admitting that he felt overwhelmed by financial pressures and the divorce. But when Dr. Levine gently pressed about the specifics of those pressures, he shut down. "This is a waste of time," he declared, standing up abruptly. "The house is mine. I decide what happens to it. End of story." As he stormed out, Dr. Levine turned to me with sympathy. "Family conflicts around inheritance are among the most difficult to resolve," she said, "especially when there are other issues at play." "What should I do now?" I asked, feeling defeated. "Based on what you've shared, your brother isn't in a place where he can engage in productive problem-solving. You may need to focus on protecting yourself while leaving the door open for reconciliation when he's ready." That evening, I returned home to find an official-looking envelope taped to my door. Inside was a typed notice. "Notice to vacate. You are hereby notified that your tenancy of the premises at address will terminate in 30 days from the receipt of this notice. The premises are needed for extensive renovations. Your cooperation in vacating the premises by the specified date is appreciated." It was signed by Derek and dated that day. No mention of the rent increase. Just an eviction, justified by fictitious renovations. I called Amanda immediately, and she confirmed my suspicions. He told Pete Wilson he could move in on the 1st of next month. Pete's the one he owes the most money to. The time for reconciliation attempts had passed. Derek had made his choice. Now, I needed to make mine. I would fight for what was right, not just for myself, but for the legacy our grandparents had intended. The eviction notice changed everything. With a clear deadline looming, I needed to act decisively. That night, I emptied my savings account to retain Nancy Foster, the legal aid attorney, for full representation. The good news, Nancy explained during our meeting the next morning, is that your brother has made several critical errors. First, this eviction notice doesn't comply with state law. Second, he's claiming renovations as the cause, which we can easily disprove given what you've told me about his plans for the space. Third, the rental was never properly registered or inspected in the first place. What's our strategy? I asked. Multi-pronged approach, she replied confidently. We'll challenge the eviction on legal grounds, while simultaneously filing complaints about the unregistered rental unit and tax discrepancies. That gives us leverage for negotiation. I don't want to get Derek in trouble with the IRS or housing authorities. I hesitated. Nancy gave me a sympathetic but firm look. Ross, I understand he's your brother, but he's trying to make you homeless to pay off a gambling debt. We don't have to pull every trigger, but we need to load the guns. She was right. I needed to be strategic, not sentimental. Over the next week, we built our case methodically. Nancy filed a formal response to the eviction notice, citing my established tenancy rights and the improper notice. This bought us time by forcing the matter into court, rather than allowing Derek to simply change the locks after 30 days. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence. I returned to the county offices and, with Patty's help, discovered something extraordinary. A safe deposit box key among my grandparents' personal effects that had never been claimed. After proving my relation and getting approval from the estate executor, I was granted access. Inside the box were various family documents, jewelry, and a sealed envelope labeled, "In case of disputes about the house." With trembling hands, I opened it to find a detailed letter from my grandfather, written just months before his death. The letter outlined clearly that, while the house was being left to Derek as the eldest grandson, this was with the understanding that I would always have access to the basement apartment at a family rate. He specified that family rate meant no more than 1/3 of comparable market rent for similar units in the area. The letter wasn't a legal codicil to the will, but it was clear evidence of intent. Even more significantly, I found a small journal of my grandfather's, where he documented conversations with Derek about the property. One entry read, "Spoke with Derek again about the house today. He promised that Ross would always have a home in the basement if needed, at the family rate we discussed. I'm satisfied that he understands this is a condition of the inheritance, even if not legally binding." These discoveries were game changers. I immediately took them to Nancy, who was equally excited. "This is excellent," she said, carefully photocopying the documents. "It establishes a verbal contract between your brother and your grandfather. Derek accepted the inheritance with the understanding that you would have access to the basement at a reduced rate." Our strategy expanded. Nancy drafted a formal letter to Derek, outlining our position. The eviction notice was invalid, we had evidence of the verbal agreement regarding my tenancy, and we were prepared to file complaints about the unregistered rental and tax issues if we couldn't reach a reasonable settlement. At the same time, I reached out to my grandmother's best friend, Margaret Wilson, who had been like family to us. Over tea in her sunroom, surrounded by photos of her grandchildren, I explained the situation. "Your grandmother would be heartbroken," Margaret said firmly. "She and your grandfather were explicit about wanting that house to benefit both of you. I remember the day they decided to leave it to Derek. They made me promise to remind him about the arrangement for you if they weren't around to do it themselves." Margaret agreed to provide a sworn affidavit about the many conversations she'd had with my grandparents about their wishes for the property. Her statement detailed specific instances where they had discussed the basement apartment being reserved for me at a family rate. Armed with these documents, Nancy suggested one more strategic move. "We should talk to the county property assessor," she advised. "If the basement has been converted to a separate dwelling without permits or rezoning, that's another issue for Derek." The visit to the county assessor's office revealed that no permits had been pulled for converting the basement from storage to living space. The house was still zoned and taxed as a single-family dwelling, not as a multi-unit property. Your brother could face significant fines, the assessor explained. Plus the cost of bringing everything up to code retroactively, which often costs more than doing it properly in the first place. I took a deep breath. What would be involved in legalizing the basement apartment properly? The assessor pulled up the property records on his computer. You'd need proper ingress and egress, windows that meet emergency exit requirements, ceiling height minimums, separate utility meters if you're charging for utilities, fire barriers between units. It's substantial work. It struck me then that all the improvements I'd made to the basement had actually moved it closer to being a legal separate unit. I'd installed larger windows, added proper electrical circuits, and improved the insulation between floors. Derek had benefited from my work in ways he might not even realize. The final piece of our strategy came unexpectedly. While searching through my own records for more evidence of our verbal agreement, I found an old email from Derek, sent just after our grandparents' funeral. In it, he wrote, "Don't worry about housing, little bro. Grandpa and I talked about this. The basement is yours whenever you need it. Family rate, just like they wanted. We take care of our own." I forwarded the email to Nancy, who called me immediately. "This is perfect," she said. "Electronic evidence of the agreement," in his own words. "Combined with everything else, we have a very strong position." 2 days later, I received an unexpected call from Amanda. "Ross, I found something you should see. Derek's gambling has been going on longer than I realized. I found bank statements showing he was taking money from your grandparents before they died. Large withdrawals from their accounts that I don't think they knew about. This revelation was shocking and painful. Had Derek taken advantage of our aging grandparents? The thought made me sick, but it also explained why he might be so desperate to erase any obligation to honor their wishes now. Guilt was a powerful motivator for avoiding the past. Amanda agreed to meet me and provide copies of the statements she'd found. As I reviewed them, a pattern emerged. Regular withdrawals from our grandparents' accounts, followed by deposits to a separate account Derek had maintained at another bank. When I showed these to Nancy, her expression turned grave. "Ross, this could potentially constitute elder financial abuse. It also raises questions about whether Derek fully disclosed all assets during the probate of your grandparents' estate. What does that mean legally?" "It means that if Derek misrepresented assets during probate, the entire distribution could potentially be invalidated. The court might reopen the estate and reconsider how property should be distributed." The implications were enormous. If Derek had hidden assets or misused funds, he might have compromised his inheritance of the house entirely. This wasn't just leverage for negotiation anymore. It was potentially a complete reversal of our positions. Nancy advised proceeding carefully. "We don't have to use this information unless absolutely necessary," she said. "Let's focus first on challenging the eviction and establishing your rights based on the verbal agreement. These financial issues are a last resort." I agreed. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy my brother. I just wanted him to honor our grandparents' wishes and treat me fairly. With our strategy in place, we sent Derek a final letter outlining our position and requesting a meeting to negotiate a resolution. His response came not in writing but in person. The next evening, he pounded on my door, clearly intoxicated and furious. "You think you can threaten me?" he shouted when I opened the door. "Go ahead, tell everyone about the gambling. See if I care." I stepped aside to let him in, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not trying to threaten you, Derek. I'm trying to find a solution that works for both of us." "There is no both of us," he yelled, pacing my small living room. "This is my house, my decision. Grandma and Grandpa wanted it to benefit both of us," I said, deciding to show my hand partially. "I have their letter, and your email promising me the basement at a family rate." Derek froze, then laughed bitterly. "Doesn't matter. No judge is going to force me to rent to you." "Maybe not," I conceded. "But they might be very interested in the unregistered rental unit the tax evasion, and the way money disappeared from Grandma and Grandpa's accounts before they died. The color drained from his face. "You're bluffing." I took out my phone and played a voice memo I'd secretly recorded during my conversation with Amanda, where she detailed the suspicious bank transfers. It wasn't admissible in court in our state, which required two-party consent for recordings, but Derek didn't need to know that. "What do you want?" he finally asked, deflated. "I want what Grandma and Grandpa wanted," I said simply. "For us to support each other. For me to have the basement at a fair family rate, and for you to get help with your gambling." Derek sank onto my couch, head in his hands. For a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him. Then he looked up, eyes cold with anger. "You'll regret this," he said, standing and moving toward the door. "I'm not the only one with secrets, little brother." As he slammed the door behind him, I knew we were headed for a legal showdown. There would be no easy resolution, but I was prepared. For the first time since our grandparents died, I felt like I was truly honoring their memory by standing up for what they had wanted. The following weeks unfolded like a high-stakes chess game. Derek made the first move, hiring an aggressive attorney named Marshall Stevens, known locally as the Bulldozer, for his confrontational tactics. Stevens immediately filed a formal eviction lawsuit, claiming I was a month-to-month tenant who had been given proper notice to vacate. Nancy countered by filing our response, which included affidavits from Walter, Margaret, and other family friends testifying to our grandparents' intentions. We also included the email from Derek, acknowledging the agreement and the letter from my grandfather. Our first court appearance was for a preliminary hearing to determine whether the eviction could proceed or if there were sufficient grounds to pause it while the larger issues were resolved. The courtroom was small and austere, with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. My parents sat in the back row, their expressions unreadable. They had maintained an uncomfortable neutrality since learning of Derek's gambling, unable to fully side with either son. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table with Stevens, both in expensive suits, projecting confidence. The judge, an older woman named Judith Hernandez, reviewed the filings with a practiced eye before addressing the court. "This appears to be more than a simple eviction case," she noted. "There are allegations of verbal agreements, questions about the property's legal status as a rental unit, and family issues that complicate matters. Before proceeding further, I want to hear directly from both parties." Derek testified first, painting himself as a generous brother who had allowed me to stay at a deeply discounted rate for years, but now needed to use the property differently. When questioned about the email acknowledging our grandparents' wishes, he claimed he'd been emotional after the funeral and hadn't meant it as a binding promise. When my turn came, I spoke honestly about our family history, the improvements I'd made to the apartment, and the consistent understanding among everyone that the basement was intended for my use at a family rate. "Your Honor," I concluded, "I'm not asking for anything that wasn't already agreed to. I've offered to increase my rent to $1,500, which is more than fair for a basement apartment in our area. All I want is for my brother to honor our grandparents' wishes and his own promises." Judge Hernandez took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When both sides had presented their initial arguments, she made her first ruling. "I'm issuing a temporary stay on the eviction proceedings," she announced. "There are sufficient questions about the nature of the agreement between these parties to warrant further examination. In the meantime, Mr. Ross Williams will continue to pay his current rent of $800 monthly until this matter is resolved." It was a small victory, but an important one. The eviction was on hold, and I could stay in my home while the case proceeded. Derek's face darkened with anger as the judge continued. "Additionally, I'm ordering an inspection of the property by the County Housing Authority to determine whether the basement unit meets legal requirements for a separate dwelling. This court needs to understand exactly what we're dealing with." This was a development I hadn't anticipated. If the inspection revealed code violations, it could complicate matters for both of us. The apartment was livable but certainly didn't meet all the requirements for a legal separate unit. As we left the courtroom, Derek brushed past me without a word. My parents approached hesitantly. "We don't like seeing you boys fighting like this," my mother said, her eyes red from crying. "Isn't there any way to work this out privately?" "I've tried, Mom," I said wearily. "Multiple times. Derek isn't willing to be reasonable." My father looked troubled. "We found out he missed the last 2 mortgage payments. The bank called us because we're listed as emergency contacts. This is worse than we thought." This new information was concerning. If Derek lost the house to foreclosure, we would both lose. Nancy and I needed to adjust our strategy. Over the next few days, several things happened simultaneously. The county housing inspector visited and, as expected, found multiple code violations in the basement apartment. The tax assessor's office opened an investigation into the unreported rental income. And most significantly, Amanda filed a motion in her divorce case, alleging that Derek had hidden assets, specifically mentioning the suspicious transactions from our grandparents' accounts. The pressure on Derek was mounting from all sides. I felt a mix of vindication and guilt. I hadn't wanted things to go this far, but Derek had left me no choice. Then came the most unexpected development of all. As Nancy and I were preparing for our next court appearance, she received a call from the probate court. "Ross," she said after hanging up, her expression serious but excited. "They found something. A codicil to your grandparents' will that was mistakenly separated from the main document during filing. The court clerk discovered it while reviewing the case file based on our inquiry." "What does it say?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "It's a formal amendment to the will, properly witnessed and notarized. It states that while the house is left to Derek, this is conditional upon him maintaining the basement apartment for your use at 1/3 of market rate for as long as you wish to live there. If he fails to honor this condition, the property ownership transfers to you, with the requirement that Derek be permitted to live in the main house at 1/3 of market rate for as long as he wishes." I sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just a letter expressing wishes or a verbal agreement. This was a legally binding condition of the inheritance that had somehow been overlooked during probate. "How could this have been missed?" I finally asked. "Clerical error," Nancy explained. "The codicil was filed separately from the main will, and apparently misfiled. It happens sometimes, especially in busy probate courts. The important thing is that we've found it now." This discovery changed everything. When Nancy informed Stevens about the codicil, he requested an immediate settlement conference. The day before the scheduled court hearing, we met in a conference room at the courthouse with Judge Hernandez presiding informally. Derek looked defeated. The confident, arrogant brother who had announced the rent increase at family dinner was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to have aged years in months. Stevens did most of the talking, while Derek stared at the table. "In light of the codicil and other factors, my client is prepared to honor the condition of 1/3 market rate for the basement apartment," Stevens announced. "We propose $1,500 monthly, which exceeds the 1/3 requirement, but has already been offered by Mr. Ross Williams." Nancy and I had discussed our position thoroughly. "We accept the $1,500 figure," she replied, "but we need additional conditions. First, the basement must be brought up to code properly, with costs shared equally between the brothers. Second, Mr. Derek Williams must enter a gambling addiction treatment program. Third, a formal written lease must be drawn up incorporating these terms and the conditions of the codicil." Stevens looked to Derek, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "My client agrees to these terms," Stevens said, "with the condition that Mr. Ross Williams assists with the permit process and improvements, given his experience with the previous renovations." Judge Hernandez looked between us. "Are both parties satisfied with this agreement?" I looked at my brother, trying to make eye contact. "Derek, is this really okay with you? I don't want to force you into anything." For the first time in weeks, Derek met my gaze. "It's what they wanted," he said quietly. "I should have honored it from the beginning." With that acknowledgement, we formalized the agreement. The eviction case was dismissed. The tax and housing investigations were resolved with minimal penalties since we were correcting the issues, and we committed to working together to properly legalize the basement apartment. As we left the courthouse, Our parents were waiting outside. When they heard about the resolution, my mother burst into tears of relief. My father, never one for emotional displays, simply nodded and said, "Your grandparents would be proud of both of you." Derek and I still had a long road ahead to rebuild our relationship, but for the first time since that fateful family dinner, I felt hope that it might actually be possible. The transformation of our family over the next 6 months was remarkable. With the legal battle behind us, we could focus on healing the wounds and rebuilding what had been broken. Derek entered a gambling addiction treatment program as agreed. It wasn't easy for him to admit his problem, especially to our parents, but once he took that step, an enormous weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. He attended meetings 3 times a week and worked with a financial counselor to develop a plan for addressing his debts. "I should have told you what was really going on," he admitted during one of our weekly coffee meetings, which had become our way of rebuilding our relationship. After Amanda found out about the gambling and filed for divorce, I panicked. I thought I could solve everything myself if I just had more money. "You don't have to handle everything alone," I reminded him. "That's what family is for." Together, we tackled the process of properly converting the basement into a legal apartment. It was expensive and time-consuming, involving permits, inspectors, contractors, and mountains of paperwork. But we shared the costs and the work as agreed. We raised the ceiling in several areas, installed proper egress windows, updated the electrical system, and added fire barriers between the units. My expertise from the previous renovations proved valuable, and Derek's business connections helped us navigate the permitting process. Working side by side, we found ourselves remembering the days when we'd helped our grandfather with projects around the house as teenagers, before competition and resentment had come between us. Our parents became actively involved as well. My father, who had always favored Derek, made a conscious effort to recognize my contributions and abilities. My mother organized weekly family dinners again, but this time with a new rule: no business or property discussions unless everyone agreed in advance. The most surprising development came 3 months after our settlement. Derek approached me with a legal document he'd had drawn up by a different attorney. "What's this?" I asked, scanning the dense legal text. "I'm adding your name to the deed," he explained, "as co-owner, 50-50. I looked up in shock. "Derek, the codicil doesn't require that. You still own the house." He shook his head. "This isn't about legal requirements. Grandma and Grandpa always intended for both of us to benefit from this place. I almost lost it completely because of my pride and my gambling. This way, even if I relapse, the house is protected." It was a profound gesture of trust and reconciliation. After consulting with Nancy, I agreed, and we finalized the co-ownership arrangement with clear terms about responsibilities and rights for both the main house and the basement apartment. The experience changed me as well. Standing up for myself against my family had been terrifying but necessary. I realized how much of my life I'd spent accepting others' judgments about my worth, particularly my father's and Derek's. The victory wasn't just about securing my home, it was about finding my voice and my confidence. This new perspective affected other areas of my life too. At work, I became more assertive in client meetings and more willing to propose innovative strategies. My boss noticed the change and assigned me to lead our biggest new account, a responsibility I would have shied away from before. I also began volunteering with the same tenant rights organization that had initially referred me to Nancy. Once a month, I helped conduct workshops for renters about their legal rights and how to navigate conflicts with landlords. Sharing my experience and the lessons I'd learned gave purpose to what had been a painful chapter in my life. Derek found his own path to redemption. After 6 months of treatment, he made the difficult decision to sell his luxury car and downsize his lifestyle to pay off his gambling debts legitimately. He also started speaking at gambling addiction support groups, using his story to help others recognize the signs of addiction before they lost everything. Our parents went through their own process of reflection. During a particularly emotional family dinner, my father apologized for the favoritism he had shown throughout our lives. "I always pushed Ross harder because I saw myself in him," he admitted. "And I was easier on Derek because he seemed to naturally succeed at everything. I didn't realize how unfair that was to both of you." As the 1-year anniversary of that fateful family dinner approached, we decided to reclaim the date with a new tradition. We gathered at the house, but this time with a purpose beyond just eating together. Each family member shared something they were grateful for, and something they had learned over the challenging year. When my turn came, I looked around at the faces of my family, all attentive in a way they had never been before. "I'm grateful for second chances," I said, "for the opportunity to rebuild what was broken. And I've learned that sometimes fighting for what's right isn't just about winning, but about creating the space for healing to begin." Derek nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And I'm grateful for a brother who fought for justice instead of revenge. You could have destroyed me, Ross, but you chose to save me instead." Our mother wiped tears from her eyes. "We've all learned that a family is stronger when it faces truth together, no matter how painful." The house that had nearly torn us apart had become the foundation for a stronger, more honest family bond. The basement apartment, now properly renovated and legal, remained my home. But it was no longer a symbol of my lesser status in the family. It was simply where I chose to live while building toward my future. As for Derek, his divorce from Amanda proceeded, but without the bitterness and accusations that had characterized its beginning. They even managed to reach an amicable settlement, with Amanda acknowledging Derek's efforts to change and take responsibility for his actions. Looking back on that year of conflict and resolution, I realized that our grandparents had given us something far more valuable than just a house. They had created a situation that, while painful, ultimately forced us to confront the dysfunctional patterns in our family and build something healthier. The house was their legacy, but the relationships we salvaged and strengthened were the true inheritance. If you've ever faced betrayal or unfairness from family members, how did you handle it? Did you fight back or walk away? Comment below with your experiences and what you learned from them. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life family stories that show the complexity of relationships and the possibility of healing. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves while still leaving room for reconciliation. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and wisdom in navigating your own family challenges.